Today I'm going to be sharing with you a tradition within Japanese culture which is known as Sado, or otherwise the tea ceremonies. These tea ceremonies seem simple at first sight. You might think that it's just a gathering where people drink tea, but it's actually much more intricate and beautiful than that. These tea ceremonies have been around in Japan for quite a while, and I'm going to share some of the history and background and some of the rules and procedures and the steps of this ceremony. So first, I'm going to start off with some background. The tea ceremonies were first held in China, actually, and they were brought over to Japan in the 1100s. And they were first used in Japan by monks. And they used this tea ceremony and drank this tea kind of as like a Zen practice, and also to help them stay awake. And then that tradition kind of transferred into samurais using it, and then in today, just everybody is able to use it. And there are two main types of this ceremony. There's one that's more informal and more simple, which takes a bit less time. And then there's another one that's a bit more formal and can take up to 4 hours, and is very complicated. Something that's very interesting about these ceremonies is that they're affected by the seasons. So the art that they use to decorate, and the scrolls and the flowers and the food that they eat, and the desserts that they eat, and the way they actually hold the ceremony is all dependent on the weather and the seasons, which I think is really cool. Usually these ceremonies are a maximum of 5 people, but that's not always the case because sometimes they're held in very large groups, up to like 100 people. And the main idea of these ceremonies are to help kind of purify the soul and cleanse yourself from the stress of everyday life. So you go to these tea ceremonies to kind of release that negativity, release and cleanse the stress and everything. So now that we know a little bit about the background of these ceremonies, let me talk to you about some rules that are involved. And there's quite a few of them, and they are to be taken pretty seriously. So the first one is that you must not arrive too late or too early, because it will interrupt the hostess processes. And the second one is throughout the ceremony, there's supposed to be very little amounts of talking. So you're meant to be very quiet and very respectful, and to not interrupt any process by talking. Another one is that the host must be trained very well in knowing how to make the tea and how to hold the ceremony. Not anybody can host these. And the guest must always be respectful towards the host and towards other guests, and to try to help create a very peaceful environment. Okay, so now we know some of the basic rules and we know some of the background. How do we hold these ceremonies, and what's it included in? These ceremonies usually begin at around noon, and these ceremonies start off with everybody meeting in a waiting area outside usually. They're usually served hot water to help quench thirst as they wait for other guests to arrive. And once all of the guests are there, what they do is they walk through a garden that's usually very beautifully and intricately decorated. And this kind of acts as a purification process, and it kind of represents moving from everyday life into this place of tranquility. And once the guests are done walking through the garden, they are met and welcomed by the host, which they have not seen at all yet that day, and that's the first time seeing the host that day. And there's still no talking, it's just a bow of respect. And then after that, they're transitioned into another waiting room, and they wait for the guests to welcome them in. And before entering the room, the guests must purify their mouths and their hands, other words, kind of just washing them. And once they do that, they're allowed to enter the tea room, and they must quietly admire the scroll that the guest has displayed for them to look at, and the pottery that the host has chosen. And if this is a ceremony that is one of the more complicated, more longer ones, what they do is they eat this meal called kaiseki, which includes appetizers, sashimi, cooked dishes, and dessert. Some examples of that would be miso soup, cooked vegetables, cooked fish, sake, and then cooked rice. After they usually eat that meal, if it's held in spring or summer, then they would burn charcoal to warm the water. And if it was done in winter, it would be vice versa. So they would warm the water first and burn the charcoal to keep the room warm. And say in the summer they'd eat first so that the room doesn't get too hot. And after everybody is finished eating, the host offers the guest a main sweet. So this is usually a very sugary dessert which is served to them before they drink the tea to cut the bitterness. And after they're served that dessert, the host will guide them back outside into the waiting room, and the guests will wait there while the host switches out the decoration. So instead of a scroll, the host will switch it to a flower, and the flower is meant to look natural, so that the way they place it looks like it's growing in nature. And after the host is done preparing all that, they'll ring a gong to let the guests know that they're welcome back in the tea room. And before they come back into the tea room, they must purify and cleanse their hands and mouth once again. And after they do that, now is the time for them to drink the tea. So the host will prepare the tea with utensils that was chosen very diligently for special reasons, special utensils. So what happens is they warm the water in a bowl, and then they mix matcha powder within it, which makes matcha tea, and they whisk it with a utensil that looks just like a whisk, but is made, I think, out of bamboo. And that could take up to 15 minutes for the host to make that tea, because they do it very carefully and really focus on the act of making the tea. And after the tea is made, it's shared with all the guests to drink. And one thing about drinking the tea is the guests must hold the bowl, and they must rotate it 90 degrees and then another 90 degrees to make sure that it's sanitary and to follow the procedure that the ceremony holds. And once they're done drinking the tea, now it's okay for them to talk. So you must only talk about the tea, the decorations, and the seasons, though. So there is no talk about the outside world or about work or about personal life, just about the utensils and the decorations the host chose, and complimenting the host on their hard work and the tea and everything. And after that conversation is done, the guests will be dismissed from the tea house, and the host will watch them until they leave, until they can no longer see the guests anymore. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Japanese tea ceremonies and leave with a deeper appreciation and understanding about Japanese culture. Thank you.